When the co-host is MIA, the show must still go on, and the excitement is on as we listen to the next chapter in the game's analytics saga and find out if Rune is going to come out of hiding. Stay tuned for this week's episode of House of Games. Welcome to this week's episode of House of Games, and as you heard me say in the intro, Rune is missing somewhere. We don't know where, so we'll see if he'll show up or not, but exciting times. Anyhow, we have our guest for the second time. So, Anthon, welcome so much to the show, and the plan today is to continue the sort of story or the in-depth dive into game analytics and looking a little bit more into the practicality and logistics of it, I assume. So, Anthon, would you just like to give a super quick rundown of who you are and maybe a little bit of a summary of what we talked about last time?
Yeah, absolutely. My name's Anthon Fynn-Williams. I am the founder and lead consultant at Swayven Digital. We're a game analytics agency. And yeah, we basically specialize in helping game studios build better games by leveraging the data that they have at their disposal. And we have, a wide range of services that span across audits down to instrumentation, analysis, data science, engineering, a whole bunch of stuff. And I've been running this business for about 3 years now, but I have over a decade experience working in marketing, analytics, data science, all that kind of stuff. But because I have a passion for games, I'm a former competitive gamer myself, so I've got a passion in gaming. So just trying to be useful in this industry in some way. Yeah, that's me.
Cool. Very nice. And this time, I think we're gonna do, as I said, sort of a more the logistics of games analytics. So,
Yeah.
would you just like to start with how you work with analytics, how you like the process, I guess, from the chronological order, from your perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. So it all depends on what type of studio we're looking at, what type of game we're trying to build, and how capable they already are with using data, right? But let's say, in a hypothetical situation, if we're working with a brand new indie studio, some guys come together, they've built a cool game, but they need help with
A quick follow-up question on that.
Yeah, sure.
So, in this scenario, so do you work with any type of size of studio? Like, do you work with people who just do it as a hobby, or do you have like, is it usually where they have a team of people, or what kind of clientele do you have usually?
So it could be anybody that builds a game and wants to improve it via data. But I'd say the type of clientele that typically fit the best are ones that have small teams. Maybe it started as a hobby, but now they're gaining some traction, maybe some investment interest, and they want to actually make it into an actual business model. So I'll say sort of those startup to maybe mid-tier AA studios tend to be our sweet spot. But we do have experience working with like bigger studios as well, AAA studios. But mostly it's the smaller scale ones, smaller to medium scale ones that we tend to work with.
Cool.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
So going back to our scenario. So let's say, we're working with a startup indie studio. They have a concept of a game, and they want to implement a data strategy, right? So a good game analytics strategy has 5 components. You have the measurement stage, which is where you establish what KPIs, what metrics define the success of your game. Then you have the instrumentation stage. This is the practical application of collecting data from your game. So implementing the right tools, whether it be Firebase, Unity Analytics, Game Analytics, whatever it might be. And you're basically mapping out what events and what parameters are important from your game to track, which will then lead into the reporting stage, which is stage 3. So this is where you start to organize and make sense of the data you're collecting. You build reports. You're able to now monitor how your game is performing at a high level, and this would be in accordance to the measurement plan you would have established in step 1. Then you have step 4, which is analysis. So this is where you're diving deeper into the data. So you're not only just understanding what is happening or how your game is performing, but you now start to uncover why things are happening. So let's say if your reporting has outlined that, I don't know, player engagement is going down for the past 3 months. In your analysis stage, you'll look to understand, okay, why is that? Why is player engagement going down? Then the last step, step 5, is the optimization step. So the insights that you are gathering from step 4 in your analysis, you ideally need to have like a scientific or a systematic way of implementing those insights or acting on those insights to optimize your game. And this could be in terms of user acquisition, player experience, monetization. There's many ways you can optimize your game based on your analysis. So if we're working with a brand new studio, we would look to take them through each of those 5 steps. But yeah, again, it depends on type of game, type of company, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So
yeah. And how long would you say, or is there an average, like how long this process is, like from say that you reach out to your company and then when you reach the end of stage 5, or I guess, analytics never really end, but like when you have like built up like a framework or something, like a working process, what would you say? Is there a timeline for that? Like you say, like this many months, or is it different for each case, or how do you think about it?
So yeah, I hate saying this answer so often, but it really does depend on how complex things are on both sides, for us and for the client, right? So I mean, in terms of step 1, that's quite theoretical. So there's no reason why we can't have that done within a week or 2 once we understand the business model of the game and what type of game it is, etc. Now, where things start to vary is from step 2 onwards, because let's say if you have a really big game with many data points you want to capture, step 2 will take longer because there's more coding to do, there's more testing to do, there's more there's more work to do to get that step fully signed off. Now, steps 3, 4, and 5, as you sort of noted earlier, they should always be ongoing processes. Like it's never really a one and done. But let's say, if we're trying to get a studio to step 5 for the first time, I'd say within 6 months, depending on how much data they have and how interested they are in the data. Definitely within 6 months, you should be able to start optimizing your game based off your data. I'd argue even sooner, but just to make sure you have enough data there and it's trustworthy, it's good quality. 6 months is roughly that ballpark. Yeah.
And how much would you say that? So say that we have a process that takes about 6 months, somewhere there. So as a client of your company, how would you say that? How much effort is divided between like the company the game company to gather all the data and infrastructure and everything that is needed and use. So is it just that you hand off like, here's the project, and then you can go and collect all of the data and connect it to analytics tools, or how much work would you say is involved for that for the average company, if there is an average, I guess?
So ultimately, it would depend on the level of support they would need from us, because we do have services that span across all of those areas, but you don't have to get all of those services from us. Like, you may already have a good data engineer within your company, so you don't need to hire data engineering services from us, right? But we can support you as a full stack analytics function, but we can also simply take the back seat and play the advisor role. It really does depend on the level of expertise already in house and how much they're willing to hire us for, if that makes sense. So
Yeah, absolutely. And off camera, we talked a little bit about this process. And so the steps that you outlined, is that part of this framework that you mentioned earlier? And could you give us just the name of that framework?
so the framework is called Game Analytics Mastery Framework, so GAMF for short, GAMF. And it's somewhat related to that 5-step process. But the GAMF, it has a process of its own. I think there's 6 stages in that GAMF. And what the GAMF is, it's simply a blueprint that is designed to help game studios sort of assess how effectively they're currently using analytics within their projects, within their business, and sort of identify the roadmap they need to take to elevate the level of data mastery, right?
Right.
So the 6 stages of the GAMF, the first is the startup stage, then you have the observer stage, then you have the Inquisitor stage, then you have the shifter, the Oracle, and the Pioneer. So those are the 6 stages. And the start.
And here's
Wow.
a stupid question, maybe. Sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, nice.
So, is it correctly assessed then that out of these 6 stages, out of that like framework, would you say that maybe the first 5 steps that you mentioned is like step 1 of this one, sort of startup, or how would you like rank them chronologically, or are they sort of like, where is the line, or how do they relate to each other?
So that's a good question, because they do relate to each other. So there is a bit of correlation, but so I'd say the GAMF is how well the studio is doing all 5 of those things.
Right.
So the startup can still do step 1 to 5, but they're not doing it as well as the Oracle, for example,
Right.
who probably have more advanced technology. They probably have bigger teams, more potent data to use for their analysis and optimization. Whereas the startup, whilst they may still be analyzing their data, they have very limited data, very limited tools, so they're not able to do it as effectively as the Oracle would, if that makes
Right.
sense. So yeah, hopefully that makes sense.
Nice.
But yeah, I mean, if you want, I can sort of briefly explain what each of the stages are.
Yes, please,
Yeah.
please.
Yeah, sure. So the startup stage. So this is where the studio, I say, starts to become aware of what analytics is and the potential value behind it, right? But it is very early stage use, so they probably have very basic implementation, like a vanilla Firebase implementation. There isn't really any custom tracking going on, and the reporting is irregular. Like, there's no sort of process around reporting, like a monthly report or anything like that. People maybe just be logging into Firebase whenever they feel interested to. Um, and there's no structured data strategy. Pretty much, that's how startup stage relatively looks like. Um, then we have the observer stage. So this is where um, the studio starts to put a bit more focus, a bit more intention around how they're using and reporting their data. Um, but their level of analysis is still very high level. They're focusing more on what is happening in the game. Um, but there is, an enhanced flow of insights or data driven communications going throughout the studio.
Yeah.
And games may start to make some initial, maybe small game adjustments based on the reporting they're receiving on a regular basis. So that's the observer stage. Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Yes. So I'm curious also about. So say that you have a company that is some sort of mid-sized company. Say it's 20 people,
Yeah,
something like that,
yeah.
and it's mostly game developers. And they hire your company to start looking at analytics and all of that. And so would you say that you also help with like learning what questions to ask? Because in analytics I feel like myself as a very much a rookie, like I would look at all of this data and maybe not know what is the signal to noise ratio, for example, what is interesting to look
Yes,
at, what will lead to success and
yes.
so on. So is that something you help out with as well?
Absolutely. So, so it's all about being data savvy, because you can have, you know, the best data in the world, but if you don't know what questions to ask, if you don't know what nuggets to look for within that data, it's going to be useless, to be honest. Um, so we definitely do help our clients with not only the technical part of being data driven, but also the theoretical part. So knowing what questions to ask, and how to answer those questions and then act on those answers, if that makes
Right.
sense. Yeah. So yeah.
And another question on that. So I guess the end result of all of this data is to make a better game. And so that's where you have the game developers. So what would you say is the person that you most preferably talk to? Do you have to have like a data scientist on staff, or do you also do a lot of work directly with game developers or game designers, for example?
Um. So really and truly, it could be any sort of game lead or game manager that is interested in the data. They don't have to be a data scientist or data professional themselves. But if they have the intention or the investment of, okay, I want to use data to improve my game, then we can work with them. So it could be product managers. It could even be the CEO of the company, or like a senior game developer. Um, Job title doesn't really matter. It's more of the personal interest, or desire to, become more data driven. Um,
Right.
if that makes sense, yeah. So
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
it's more of a culture thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Sure.
um,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Cool.
yeah, um, yeah. So I'll go on to explain what the Inquisitor stage of the GAMF is. So this is the third stage. So this stage, basically they do everything the observer is doing plus more. So now they start to uncover why things are happening in the game. So they're more analysis focused. But for them to be able to do this, they probably have uh, a higher level of data experts within the company. They're able to utilize more uh, sophisticated analysis techniques to uncover insights. And the game leads, the game designers, game managers, they're able to acquire even more useful insights from the data, because now they're getting answers to problems they may be having, and they're able to use those answers to make big game development decisions around player experience, player engagement. So yeah, so Inquisitor, as the name suggests, like it's more of the investigative stage of the GAMF, if that makes sense. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So what would you say in these steps? Like, what is the, if there is there any like best moment to be in, like in the best stage of game development to be in? Like, is it better to do this when the game is already out and released, or is it better to do this like before you start making the game, or starting testing, like prototyping, or do you have any, like, where is the sweet spot, if there is any?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So it could apply to any stage of the game development cycle. I think we touched on that briefly in the last episode. Um, but I'd say this probably more applies to when the game. So either the prototyping stage, um, the beta testing stage, or when the game is out, right, already. So let's say if you're a live service game, and you want to inform your next game update, like what needs to be fixed to improve player retention or player engagement. That's probably where this stage would be the most useful, but it can also be used to inform future game projects as well. So let's say if you're a single player game, and you want to learn what people enjoyed about your previous game, so you can apply those learnings to your next sequel. This can be applied as well. Um, yeah, hopefully that
Interesting.
answers your question. Yeah.
Cool.
Um,
Another question related to that. So, say that, for example, you have the scenario where you are going to make a sequel and you want to take all the feedback and the things you learned from the first game and then apply it to the second one. So, do you only analyze the data from the game itself, where maybe gameplay and player retention and things like that, or do you also check things like Steam reviews or comments and likes and maybe stuff from social media and so on?
so you definitely want to utilize as much data as possible, and also utilize both quantitative data and qualitative data. So the data being captured in your analytics tool, Firebase, GA, whatever, is probably quantitative, tracking how often things are happening, conversion rates, engagement rates, all that kind of stuff. Now, the qualitative data, as you mentioned, would come from stuff like game reviews, social media, forum discussions, maybe even like YouTube videos, all that kind of stuff. So to get, the best view or the best type of analysis, you need to find a way to join the two together, basically.
Right.
So let's say, you know, in your quantitative data, you're showing that a certain level is maybe a bit too difficult for people. Maybe the completion rate for that level is low. You may want to look at your social media or forum posts to see if people are talking about that level and what they're
Right.
saying about that level and why they're finding it difficult. And then based on what you find, you can make adjustments to your game either way. Interestingly, I was listening to another podcast, and they were talking about Candy Crush, and I think there was
Right.
a certain level. I think it was like level 300 or something that was really difficult. Um, but they found that the level being difficult was actually attracting people to the game because people
Hmm.
wanted the challenge of trying to solve it and then helping other people. So once they found out that insight, they actually decided to make more levels more difficult to
Oh,
kind of
interesting.
yeah. It's counterintuitive because most companies would be like, oh, let's make the level easier so people can have a higher completion, uh,
Right.
right? But
Reminds me,
yeah,
yeah, it reminds me a little bit about a friend of mine mentioned a guy who owned a lamp store, and he had this old lamp that he wasn't able to sell it for like years and years, So then what he tried to do, because he tried to putting it on sale, and nobody wanted it. So what he tried to do then was just like something like double the price, and then it got sold instantly. And
Oh
I
wow!
think it's
Yeah,
something like,
yeah.
yeah, like if it's free, it's worth nothing, but if it's expensive, it has some worth,
Yeah,
whether
yeah,
real or
yeah,
not.
yeah. Exactly. Yeah, there's definitely some interesting human psychology things that you often come across when you analyze data.
Yeah,
So, but yeah, so what everything we just discussed is applications or examples of how a studio in the Inquisitor stage would operate, if that makes sense. Um,
right.
so the next stage, so stage 4 now is the shifter.
Before you
Oh,
move on to the next
yeah,
stage, I
yeah,
have
no
another
worries.
question.
Yeah, go for it.
So, yeah, if there is like any estimate on this, so how much time would you say is for each step? Do you know if there's, or could you say something like, well, step one, it's usually between 1 and 2 months, or step two, it's 3-4 months or something, or is there anything like that, or to get an idea of what you're signing up for when you start this journey of data mastery?
So I mean, this will probably be something we'll touch on more later on, but the GAMF framework oftentimes is like a transitional thing. So you might have elements of your data function that are in the startup, and then other elements that are in the observer stage. And then over time, as you become more sophisticated, you gradually become more of a observer, and then from that point, you sort of gradually become more of a inquisitor. So it's never like, oh, month one you're this, month two you're that. Month three. It's a gradual sort of transitional kind of flowy kind of
Right.
process thing. But if I had to put timescales on it, well, I'd put recommended timescales. So let's say if you're a brand new studio, I'd say, okay, maybe it can be startup stage for about 3 months, I'd say 1 to 3 months. But at that point, you should start looking to um, put more structure behind your data strategy. So I'd say maybe 3 to 6 months could then be observer, and then maybe 6 to 9 months you can start to become an inquisitor. But then this is where, depending on what type of studio you are, you may be blocked for a while, because the shifter stage usually applies to studios that have become a bit bigger in size,
Yeah.
because there's more data sources that they can leverage. So shifter is where you're not only focusing on the game data, but you're also focusing on your business data as well. So like your marketing data, your social media, your customer support data as well, and you're basically combining all of those data sources to get a 360 view of your player. So let's say, if you have a certain type of player that doesn't like a certain aspect of your game, you can sort of match that to the type of person they are based on their marketing preferences or the social media profiles or interests, that kind of stuff. And you start to build a business strategy or a game strategy based on that holistic view of the player, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So for an indie studio, it would be quite hard for them to get to that level because they're still quite small. They haven't got the tech or the data or the infrastructure to really leverage that 360 view of the player. Um, so steps 4, 5, and 6, it ultimately just depends on the size of the studio and how much resources they have to invest in a data strategy or technology, if that makes sense. So But steps 1 to 3, I'd say if you're a brand new indie studio, let's say within the first year maximum, you should be by step 3.
Right.
If
Nice.
that makes sense. So, um, yeah,
Cool.
yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
please go ahead.
Yeah. So I feel like I've kind of explained stage 4 a little bit. Do you have any questions on stage 4?
No, not at the moment. I'll probably interrupt you at some point
Okay,
with
cool.
more questions.
Sure, no worries. Um, so stage 5, the Oracle stage, this is where the studio starts to apply more forward-looking applications to the data, so more predictive analytics, and they can use the data to predict trends, to set targets, forecasts, and also solve complex game problems like game balancing or you know player churn. So being able to identify a player that might churn soon, and then maybe giving them like a personalized campaign to stop that churn. Um, all that sort of fancy data sciencey, machine learning, predictive data stuff is when the Oracle starts to come into play. Um, and yeah, to get to this stage, you do need quite a high level of data expertise within your company. I mean, you can work with consultants to help you get to the stage initially, but then maybe to carry that on, I would recommend building an in-house team to carry that expertise forward. Um, and then by the Oracle stage, there's usually a strong data-driven culture within the company, so everybody loves the data, everybody is interested in it, and yeah, that's pretty much how the Oracle stage looks. Um, Now, the last stage, the Pioneer stage. So this is the pinnacle stage of data mastery, and it's really where the studio is using some cutting edge technology to edge out a competitive advantage in the market. Maybe they're doing something that nobody else is doing, um, and they're probably working with big data, definitely, and using like AI, machine learning, whatever, to really set themselves apart from the rest of the market. I'd say this stage is probably limited based on what I've seen to like the top AAA studios. So, Activision, Bungie, uh, you know, all of those type of studios. Um, an example could be using AI to like empower their NPC characters, and let's say that the NPC is able to detect what type of player they're engaging with, and then they change their reactions based on that sort of communication. So I think Bungie does that quite well. But yeah, I mean, not many studios are at this stage based on what I've seen. It is still quite a relatively new area. Um, but I think in the next, 5 to 10 years, we'll start to see more of these type of studios for sure. Um, so yeah, I think those are the 6 stages of the GAMF framework.
Cool.
Um, yeah,
I do have some questions about that. I think it was that last step. So, for predictive analysis, what does that mean exactly? What can you predict? Do you have any examples, like in what scenario you would use something like that? Because it sounds like something cool, like what is that movie with Tom Cruise with pre-crime and something like that.
I mean, so based on the data you have, you can predict. I won't say almost anything, but like the KPIs that define the success of your game, you should be able to predict on those at least. So, for example, let's say game revenue, right? So let's say if you've got 10 years worth of historical revenue data, you should be able to predict at least the next 2 years, right? Uh, the type of analysis you would do, maybe like a linear regression analysis or something like that, time series analysis. And then those predictions, you can use that as your target for those next years. So, okay, so in the next 2 years, we expect to make this much money based on the data that we've observed over the past 5 or 10 years. Now, the predictions may not always be as accurate as you would think because things like COVID or external world events can really mess up your predictions. But considering if everything remains normal over the next how many years, depending on how sophisticated your data teams are and how well they're able to build those predictive models, would really establish how well you're able to predict the performance of your game in the future, right? Other stuff you may want to predict is your player base. So based on the acquisition and churn rates we're currently observing, or we have observed for the past 5 years, what do we expect our player base size to be 2 years from now? That kind of stuff. And then you could also use predictive analytics to so build segments of players and then identify what player types are likely to churn at different stages of their player cycle or life cycle of your game, for example. So if I was to give an example, so let's say we have player A and player B. So player A, he's a hardcore gamer. He plays, 2 hours a day, 3 hours a day. But maybe after 3 months, he might get bored of it, right? So let's say if we collect or we observe enough scenarios of those player A's, we can look at his parameters, like things that sort of describe him, and then build a lookalike audience. So when we come across other similar players to player A in the future, when it gets to that 3 month mark, maybe we give them an incentive to keep playing the game, so they don't also churn after 3 months, right? If that makes sense. So, and then, let's say if player B is a different type of player, maybe he plays for 1 week, but maybe finds it too hard, so he gives up. When we come across other players that sort of meet that criteria, we can maybe give them a clue or send them an email to say, hey, this is how you complete the step or complete that level. So they keep playing after 1 week. So that's sort of where you can apply predictive analytics to improve your actual game experience and game retention. Yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And Minority Report was the movie I was thinking about. Yeah, but something else I thought about that you talked about was you don't only like analyze just the game, but you can do stuff like revenue and more generalized analytics as well. Then, as I understand it.
Yes, correct. Yeah. So you can apply predictive analytics to like your business strategy reporting, but also to improving your game experience as well. So
right.
Yeah.
So I don't remember if I asked this last time, but so a related point to that is, say that you have this game that you want to make and you have a couple of like $1 million to make it, for example, and then you want to sort of calculate the man hours that it will take to make this game, and that will like sort of give you a figure of how much the salary costs would be to make this game. Do you do stuff like that as well, or is that something completely separate?
Um, we could do. I mean, it's not a service that we currently offer at the moment because to be able to do that type of analysis, you would need access to internal data.
Yeah,
And let's say if you're a brand new studio and you've never built that type of game before, you wouldn't have the data to really inform that decision. But let's say if you're like a
right.
if you're like a AAA studio, Activision, you make COD every year. You know, based on your previous titles, how many man hours it took to develop that game, so you can kind of budget or plan based on the previous projects. Um, so ultimately, it would depend. Yeah,
Yeah,
it would depend. Yeah, yeah.
interesting. And I thought something about what you said talked a little bit about like player archetypes, if I
Yep, yep.
remember correctly. Yeah. So do you work anything with like rankings and matchmaking and stuff like that, where you have to sort of analyze your player base and sort of understand how these players match together and which player should play against how difficult opponent and how often and so on?
I mean, yeah, that's definitely something we can help the studio sort of analyze and help balance. Yeah, ultimately, it will just come down to what type of data sources they have, what are they capturing about their players, how are they measuring the success of their matchmaking system,
Yeah.
and yeah, we can help them analyze and optimize accordingly for sure. Yeah.
Cool. And there is a really good GDC talk I can recommend, by the way, about this very thing. I just listened to it as a rookie, so I don't know. I can't make any judgments if it's accurate or not. But there is a talk called "Skill Matchmaking and Ranking Systems Design," which is very good. I'll link it in the description. But a really good talk about this very thing that
Yeah, yeah,
it
yeah,
reminded me a
yeah.
lot of.
Yeah, I mean, I know skill based matchmaking is a hot topic amongst multiplayer games. A lot of people in the COD community hate the skill based matchmaking because, like,
Yeah,
in every game you're playing someone that is as good as you, so you never really get a chance to relax and just enjoy the game. You're always having to sweat and
yeah,
try hard. Whereas in other games like Destiny, even though there's still is skill based matchmaking, it's not as obvious, I would say, as it is
yeah.
in COD. So yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Definitely a hot topic for sure.
yeah, and it's interesting that it's very like Counter Strike, for example, is very. It's not like it used to be, where you just join a server and then play some games and then you hop off and that's it.
Yeah,
That it's very much more tracked and
yeah, yeah,
guided more
yeah,
than it used to be.
yeah. Absolutely.
And
Yeah,
as a company, like if you listen to this and you feel, for example, that there's some stuff that would be really interesting to do, but maybe not all of it. Do you have to go like all the way as a company, or is there some companies that prefer like just getting to the observer state and then we're happy with that? We have all that we need, for example.
yeah. I mean, absolutely. Not every company has to get to the pioneer stage. Ultimately, it just depends on the strategy of your game, of your business, right? And what you're actually physically capable of achieving at that time. As I sort of uh, alluded to earlier, not every studio can get to Pioneer or even the shifter stage because their business model or the business size won't allow them to do that. So um, I'd say as long as you're sort of gaining the maximum value of your data, um, sort of in relation to where your business is at or where your studio is at that point in time, I'd say you're in a good place. So if you're, a mid-tier studio, maybe getting to the shifter stage is probably your pinnacle for the time being.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's nothing wrong with getting to step 4 or step 3 and being happy with that. So yeah.
Cool. Very interesting. If we can dream a little bit about the future, so something that we usually talk about on this podcast is AI. So is that something that you're looking at, like from your perspective, that you could use, for example, an AI that would just go through all of the data that you have and then come up with suggestions how to improve your game, or like they could look at comments and automatically suggest like this level is what people complains about the most or something like that?
Yeah, it's definitely an idea that I've thought of. AI is a hot topic right now in tech world. I'd say the only, I won't say challenge, but the important thing to do if you want to leverage AI is getting the AI to be able to access all the different data sources that it would need to, and also
Right.
then being able to identify what to look for. So basically, the question that it's trying to answer, and then being able to sort of synthesize all the different data sources, sort of map them all together, come up with a sensible insight, and then being able to feed that back to you in a way that makes sense, right? So I haven't seen any tool on the market that does that fully. Even though tools like Google Analytics, Firebase, they do have some form of a machine learning thing going on, but um, it's not to the depth that I think it could be. But I think in the next 5 to 10 years, you might see some tools that are able to do that. And yeah, I may or
Cool.
may not be working on one myself. Wink, wink.
Oh, interesting. Very interesting. So let's
Yeah.
say we could dream a little bit that you have like 10 years to work on this and you have unlimited resources. Like what in the future, like the ultimate AI for game analytics, for example, what would that be? Like what functions would they have, or what uses could you have for that? Hi, this is Otto from the future at the editing stage. At this point in the episode, my video stopped recording, which means I will instead provide a voiceover that paraphrases something like what I said at the time. Apologies for the technical difficulties, and now back to the regularly scheduled program and our wonderful guest Anthon.
Hmm. So, okay. So the AI is like an engine, right? So for the engine to work, it would need to ingest a bunch of stuff. So if it's able to, so let's say you give it um, access to all your data tools, right? So it has your login credentials, whatever, and is able to crawl or inspect or observe or pull the data from all those tools by itself, and then it's able to then through its engine analyze the data, put together a report, get some insights, and then on the outside of that is able to build a dashboard or build a PowerPoint presentation or an Excel sheet with the data nicely organized, and there's charts made and there's comments underneath that answers the questions that you told it to answer. Um, I think that would be a good space or good solution for AI in the data world. Um, so yeah, I think that's my vision for that. Yeah.
So here would be my idea for the ultimate AI for game analytics. So imagine that you have a an AI that gets all of the data from comments, from qualitative data, I guess, about what people think about your game, videos, comments, and so on, that say stuff like this area doesn't work, or this game is difficult, or this is a bug in the game that makes it unenjoyable, something like that. And then on the other side, you would have the game look at the code, the repository for your game, and then based on those suggestions or what people think about the game, it would then merge that data and then make suggestions that here in this part of the code you can fix this bug that people are talking about, for example, to make it sort of helpful and allow you to build a better game from all the data automatically without having to do that manually. So that would be my idea for the ultimate AI companion to making games.
Yeah, that's a really good idea as well, actually. Yeah. I'm gonna take some notes on that.
Before we end the episode, is there anything else you would like to add, or anything that you would like our listeners to know?
Yeah. One more thing I want to add quickly is so if studios want to sort of analyze or assess where they are on the GAMF, there is an article on my website that explains this topic more in depth. But basically, there's 10 dimensions that basically determine your data mastery level, and depending on how well your company or your studio um, is positioned in each of those 10 dimensions, will determine where you are on the GAMF. So those 10 dimensions is purpose. So what is the purpose of your analytics function? Stakeholders. So who is the main audience? Who's the people that look at the data the most? Impact. So what extent does your data-driven initiatives drive in game design, game development, all that kind of stuff? Expertise. So what capabilities does your team have in being able to use and leverage data? Priorities, what type of task do they focus on the most? Then we have 6, what is the end result of those data people's work? Measurement, which is basically how sophisticated are the KPIs that you use in your measurement plan, basically. Then you have techniques, what analysis techniques are you able to leverage? So it kind of links to expertise in a way. Then you have data sources, which is number 9. What type of data sources does your studio have access to? Then lastly, 10, technology. What type of technology does your game studio have access to? So, the article on our website explains that in more detail, but basically, those 10 dimensions is what is used to assess where you are on the GAMF. Yeah. So we did do a webinar recently last week. It went well. We had a couple of people interested in working with us afterwards. The audience were really engaged. They asked great questions. But because that was my first ever webinar, I made a really, really rookie error, and I forgot to press record before I presented. So, but I will record another video on that same topic. I still have the content that I presented, so I'm gonna make a YouTube channel. I'll upload that video and then probably record other videos that our audience would be interested in. So I'm definitely gonna get like a YouTube video strategy going on. I am also looking to speak at some events in the future. I've applied to some conferences, but I'm waiting to hear back from them. But in the meantime, we are very active on LinkedIn. We post daily on LinkedIn. And yeah, just gonna continue writing blogs as well. Just doing it as much as I can to get our name out there. So, yeah.
Lastly, where can our viewers connect with you and learn more about your company and what you do?
So, we do have a website. So it's swayvendigital.com. So that's SWAYVENDIGITAL.com. gital.com. We are also on LinkedIn as well, Swayven Digital on LinkedIn, or you can follow me on LinkedIn, Anthon Fynn-Williams. And yeah, we will have a YouTube channel shortly as well. So if you're listening in the future, hopefully the link is in the podcast description by then. But yeah, that's our platform. So that's where you can find us. Yeah.
That's all for this episode. I really hope you enjoyed it as much as I did in making it. As usual, you can find all the relevant links to things we talked about or mentioned in the description below. Please leave a comment or send in a voicemail if you have opinions, questions, or anything else that you would like us to know. Thanks again to Anthon and Swayven Digital for taking the time to be on our show and sharing their wealth of knowledge, and thank you for listening. See you next Wednesday!